This is the lesson for 12-7. What you're doing today is solving quadratic equations by completing the square. All right. So if you think back to previous sections, all right, in the previous sections, you had to factor a trinomial like this. When we factor a trinomial, and you will have to do this today in the questions, we're looking for what times what is the last number that adds up to the middle number. Now, in all of these questions today, they're all going to be perfect squares, meaning that both of these two sets of parentheses will be the same thing each time. So what times what is 4? That adds up to -4. Well, it would be -2 and -2. So we would do m minus 2 and m minus 2. Now, there is a different way. If you think back to when we were doing perfect squares, there is a different way that you could write that. Because they're both the same thing, and we're multiplying the two sets of parentheses together, we could really rewrite this as m minus 2 squared, because that's really what m minus 2 times m minus 2 is. Also, if you think back to previous sections, if we had an equation like this that you needed to solve, the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So to get rid of this squared part, we would have to take the square root and square root. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you would have to do to the other side of the equal sign. By taking the square root, it gets rid of the squared and the parentheses. So we have m minus 2. The square root of 16, please remember, because this is super important, the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. It's not just positive 4, it's plus or minus 4. After this, if we are solving this, remember that we have to split it into two separate problems because of the plus or minus. We would have m minus 2 equals 4, and we would have m minus 2 equals -4, because we have to have one with the positive 4 and one with the -4. Then we would solve both sides, plus 2 plus 2. So we would have m equals 6. And on the other side, plus 2 plus 2. And we would have m equals -2. And those would be your two answers. Now, these are all parts of what we're doing today. All right, these are all parts. We're sort of combining all this into one gigantic problem today. So what you're doing today is you are doing something called completing the square. On the Regents exam, they will say, solve the following quadratic equation by completing the square. All right, this is a very specific process that you have to go through, where the quadratic expression is written in vertex form, but it allows you to solve for the zeros. What you're going to do is you're going to add a number to both sides of the equation so that you have an equation that looks like this. All right, that's what we're going to rearrange our thing at the beginning to look like, is this. What that really looks like is, on that last slide, it looked like the original problem here. All right, we want to rearrange our stuff so that it looks like this, where you have a variable plus or minus a number squared equals another number. That's what we want to rearrange our equations to look like. What you're going to be doing is you're going to find half of the b value. All right, find half of the b value and then square it. All right, that's what we're going to be doing in all the problems. That won't make any sense until we start. But before we even do that, we need to come up with how to find these middle numbers in a trinomial and how to come up with these last numbers in the trinomial to make the trinomial a perfect square. So if we had x squared plus something x plus 36, what number would go in here, all right? What number would go in front of the x as our b value to be a perfect square? Well, when you're looking for these b values, what you have to do is just what times what is 36. That is a perfect square. Well, the square root of 36 is 6. So this would have to be a 6 here. How could I rewrite this to be in this form? All right, I could rewrite it to be in that form as x plus 6. Sorry, yeah, x plus, this is not a 6 though, this is a 12. X plus 6 and x plus 6. Because we would have to do what times what is 36? Well, 6 times 6 is 36. That's the perfect square. 6 plus 6 is 12, which gives us our b value. Remember, I could change this to be x plus 6 squared. Looking at the next one, we have a what times what is 4. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. So I would have x plus 2 and x plus 2. If I add together my inners and my outers, 2x plus 2x would give me 4x. And again, I could rewrite this as x plus 2 squared. Notice that this next one has a minus sign here. Well, what times what is 100? That's a perfect square. It would be 10 times 10. So, but you have a minus sign here. Because you have a minus sign here, this would have to be x minus 10 times x minus 10. Because when we add together our inners and our outers, that would have to be a negative. So to have that, it has to be a minus and a minus. So this would be a minus 20x in the middle. X squared plus something plus 49. What times what is 49? That's a perfect square. Well, it would be 7 times 7. So we would have, notice we have a plus there. So it would be x plus 7 times x plus 7. So 7 plus 7, adding together your inners and your outers, that would give you a 14x there. For these other ones, how to find the c value. All right, remember that a value is the squared part. The b value is the term in front of the x. Your c value is your plus or minus your number at the end. What you would have to do, and this is the process that you're going to have to do today, what you're going to do is take half of your b value, take half of the b value, then square it. Take half of your b value and then square it. You're going to have to do this in every single question today. So in order to find that c value, we need to take half of that b value and square it. Well, half of the b value, half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1 times 1, which is 1. Take half of your b value and square it. Half of 16 is 8. 8 squared gives you 64. Now, these get a little bit more tricky when you have negatives. You have to be very careful on your calculator. Take half of your b value. Half of negative 22 is negative 11. Negative 11 squared. Now, here's where you need to be very careful on your calculator. If you type this into your calculator, you will get the wrong answer. Negative 11 squared has to have parentheses around it like this. Negative 11 times negative 11 is a positive 121. If you don't type in the parentheses when you square it for a negative number, if you type this into your calculator right now, without the parentheses, you'll get a negative 121, which would be wrong, right? So we don't want to type it in like that. Take half of your b value and square it. Half of negative 6 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9. Again, if you type this into the calculator and didn't type in the parentheses, you would get it wrong. So what the heck are the questions going to look like? Well, the questions are going to look like these. And there is, if you're somebody that writes big in person, you're going to want to write small because there's a lot of work to fit in there. All right. These are the steps that you're going to follow for every single question. What the first step is, it says move the C value to the other side of the equation. Now remember, this is our A, this is our B, this is our C. We want to move our C value to the other side of the equal sign. Now you can't just go and take the +2 and put it there. Think about solving normal equations. Since this is a +2, I need to do -2 and -2. It's just like solving any other equation. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. So those cancel out. So now I'm down to x squared minus 4x equals -2. It seems like a weird first step because in other stuff that we were doing, we were trying to set it equal to 0. Here we're not, all right? Here, the first step is to move C to the other side. Now what you want to do is you want to take half of your B value, square it, and then add it to both sides of the equation. So we're going to take this, we're going to go out here, we're going to take half of that B value. So half of it, half of -4 is -2. And then we want to square it. -2 squared is -2 times -2, which is +4. All right, so that's what I have over here. I have a +4. Then I want to add it to both sides of the equation. Well, I need to add it here, and I need to add it here. You cannot add together an x with a plain number. All right, the plain number has to go after it to stay in standard form. So now what do I have? Now I have this equation. Now I have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals -2 plus 4 is 2. Now it looks like a trinomial right here. This trinomial, what we did there is we created a perfect square. This is actually a perfect square right here. What times what is 4? That adds up to -4. Well, it would be x minus 2 times x minus 2. So what we're going to do is write x minus 2 squared. All that we did was we did a reverse FOIL to it. What times what is 4? That adds up to -4. Well, it would be -2 times -2. So x minus 2 squared. We didn't touch that equal sign yet. We didn't touch the 2 yet. So we're just going to bring those down. Now it looks like just like what we did at the beginning. Notice that, remember at the beginning, we factored a trinomial, which is what we just did. Now we're going to do this part where we have to solve it. So the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root of a number. So now that you get down to here, square root, square root. So x minus 2 equals, remember when you take the square root of a number, it's plus or minus the square root of 2. Now we have to solve it, so we have to split it. So we're going to have x minus 2 equals the square root of 2, and x minus 2 equals the negative square root of 2. We're going to solve both of these. So if we were going to leave it in simplest radical form, plus 2 plus 2. So we get x equals radical 2 plus 2. That would be one answer. On the other side, plus 2 plus 2. And we would have x equals negative radical 2 plus 2. If we were leaving it in simplest radical form, that's what we would have. So half of your questions today say leave it in simplest radical form. Half of them say round to the nearest 10th. If it said round to the nearest 10th, you would just have to type that into the calculator. The square root of the square root of 2 plus 2. Just type it right into the calculator. Remember, you got to use the second button to get access to the square root. Square root of 2 plus 2 is 3.4. And the negative square root of 2 plus 2 is 0.6. And that's all one question. Can you see why it would be like a 7 or 8 point question on the Regents exam? There's a lot to do there. All right, there's a lot to do. Is there any shortcuts that you can take? No, no, there's not. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So the first thing that we want to do is move C to the other side. We want to get this 12 to the other side. So we have to do plus 12 and plus 12. That's your first step. So we have x squared minus 6x equals 12. The next thing that we want to do is take half of our b value and square it. So half of our b value would be a -3, because half of -6 is -3. And then we want to square it. -3 squared is -3 times -3, which is +9. That's the number that I want to add to both sides. +9 plus 9. So when I add those, now I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 21. Now we created our perfect square. Our perfect square is x squared minus 6x plus 9. What times what is 9 that adds up to -6? Well, it would be an x minus 3 and an x minus 3. So we have x minus 3 squared equals 21. Now we need to solve that. So we're going to take the square root, take the square root. So we have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 21. Now that you have your plus or minus, we need to split it into two parts. We have x minus 3 equals the square root of 21. And we have x minus 3 equals the negative square root of 21. Solving it, we want to get the x all by itself, so plus 3 and plus 3. So x equals the square root of 21 plus 3. That would be it in simplest radical form. Plus 3 plus 3. So we would have x equals the negative square root of 21 plus 3 in simplest radical form. As a decimal, all you would have to do is type that answer into the calculator. Second square root, 21. Make sure that your plus 3 goes out from underneath. You got to use the arrow pad to do the plus 3. And you would end up with 7.6 here. And then the negative square root of 21 plus 3 is negative 1.6 here. Take a look at the next one. So again, the first thing that we want to do is move our c value to the other side. So plus 6 plus 6. X squared plus 4x equals 6. Take half of your b value and square it. Half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. That's the number that we want to add to both sides. Plus 4 plus 4. Yes, you're always going to add it to both sides, because if you think about it, you're squaring a number. So this number is always going to be positive. So yes, you're always going to add it to both sides. X squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 10. What you did now was you created a perfect square. What times what is 4 that adds up to 4? Well, it would be 2 and 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4. when you add together your outers and your inners. So this is really x plus 2 squared equals 10. Now you want to solve that. The opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root. So you have x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. Don't forget that plus or minus. Now that you have your plus or minus, we want to split it into two questions. X plus 2 equals the square root of 10, and x plus 2 equals the negative square root of 10. Solve it by getting the x all by itself, so minus 2 minus 2. So x equals the square root of 10 minus 2. That would be it in simplest radical form. Minus 2 minus 2. X equals the negative square root of 10 minus 2. That would be it in simplest radical form. As a decimal, you'd have to type it into the calculator. You would get 1.2 here, and you'd get negative 5.2 here. Go ahead and try this next one on your own, please. Go ahead and try the next one on your own. I'd highly encourage you, those of you on Zoom, to try this one. So the first thing that you want to do is get the c value to the other side. So you want to do +4 and +4. So you have x squared minus 2x equals 4. The next thing that you want to do is take half of your b value and square it. Half of -2 is -1. -1 squared is -1 times -1, which is +1. That's what we want to add to both sides. So now we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 5. You now created a perfect square. What times what is 1 that adds up to -2? Well, -1 times -1 is +1. -1 plus -1 is -2. So we would have x minus 1 squared equals 5. The next step is to take the square root, square root, square root. So we have x minus 1 equals square root of 5. Sorry, x minus 1 equals the square root of plus or minus radical 5. Split it. X minus 1 equals the square root of 5. And x minus 1 equals the square root, negative square root of 5. +1 plus 1. So we get the square root of 5 plus 1. +1 plus 1. So we get x equals the negative square root of 5 plus 1. If we had to make it into decimals, you would type in the square root of 5 plus 1, which is 3.2. Over here, we would get -1.2. Questions on this one? All right, I want you to try one more. All right, try this last one, please. X squared plus 10x plus 2 equals 0. Stop wrong. Since the very first day of school. In September. The first thing that you want to do is get that C term over to the other side. So we want to do -2 and -2 first. X squared plus 10x equals -2. The next step, and this is the most important one, take half of your b value and then square it. Half of 10 is 5. 5 squared equals 25. So that's the number that we want to add to both sides. So now we have x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 23. Now what we did is we created a perfect square right here with the trinomial. What times what is 25 that adds up to 10? Well, 5 times 5 is 25. 5 plus 5 is 10. So we have x plus 5 squared equals 23. Next step is to take the square root and take the square root. So by doing that, we have x plus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 23. Split it into 2. X plus 5 equals the square root of 23. X plus 5 equals the negative square root of 23. Minus 5 minus 5. So we have x equals the square root of 23 minus 5. And minus 5 minus 5. So we have x equals the negative square root of 23 minus 5. If we were to put them in decimals, you'd have to type them into the calculator. You get negative 0.2 and you get negative 9.8. So these are what your homework questions look like today. All right, they look just like these. This is a very, very difficult topic. This is one of the ones that is tested on the Regents exam all the time.